I still remember the exact sound, not the gasp from the back of the tent, not the scrape of a chair, not the sudden drop in the string quartet's tempo. As the musicians registered that something in the room had changed, what I remember is the sound of silverware touching porcelain, deliberately, precisely, the way a man sets down a tool he no longer needs. It was the sound of a decision being made. Outside the tent, I could hear the river. It had been moving past that lawn for longer than any of us had been alive, and it would be moving past long after the tent was taken down, and the chairs were stacked, and the string lights were packed away. It didn't require an audience. It simply moved. He was seated at a corner table near the white linen drapes, not at the head table, not where anyone important was supposed to be, just a gray-haired man in a dark civilian suit. No medals, no insignia, no indication of who he was to anyone who didn't already know. He had been eating quietly for most of the evening. He had not spoken to anyone at his table in the last 20 minutes. He had simply been listening, the way certain people listen. Not with their ears, but with their entire posture, calibrated and still. The way I had been taught to listen in rooms that didn't allow for mistakes. He set his fork down, then he stood up. Every military person in that wedding tent, and there were exactly 3 of us, felt it before we understood it. Something in the air shifted. Something in the room's geometry corrected itself. 200 guests in their summer formal wear continued for one more breath. 2 more breaths, unaware. And then the conversations began to die, one by one, like lights going out across a neighborhood after a storm. My Aunt Patricia was still speaking. She was mid-sentence. In fact, her champagne flute raised toward the ceiling in a gesture she had rehearsed. I was certain, at least several times in front of a mirror. She had been giving what she called a toast. But what was? In practice, a 15-minute portrait of her own family's achievements, delivered to 200 guests who were really just an audience she had borrowed for the evening. She had not yet noticed that the gray-haired man was standing. She had not yet noticed that he was looking at me. The contrast was so complete it seemed almost staged. Patricia, standing, champagne raised, speaking to fill the room. The gray-haired man, seated until that moment. Still, watching with the quality of attention that requires no performance. In my experience, the people who need the room's attention most are rarely the people the room most needs, and she had not yet heard him speak. 4 words, in a voice that carried the way voices carry when they have spent decades accustomed to being the last word in a room. Colonel Cross, forgive me. 4 words. The tent went entirely silent. My Aunt Patricia's champagne flute lowered, very slowly, until it rested against the tablecloth. And for the first time in the 38 years I had known her, she had absolutely nothing to say. Before I tell you who that man was, before I tell you what he said next, and why every person in that tent went completely still, hit subscribe. Because what happened in the next 4 minutes changed something in that room that has not changed back. And I need you to understand how we got there. But to explain why that moment happened, why a man whose name I still cannot say publicly crossed a ballroom in South Carolina to stand in front of a table of people who had spent an entire evening treating me like a footnote. I need to take you back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the wedding. The beginning of what the wedding revealed. My name is Margaret Cross. Most people call me Maggie. I am 45 years old, and I live alone in a rented house outside of Fayetteville, North Carolina, that I have been meaning to paint for 3 years. The house has 4 rooms and a porch that catches the afternoon light in a way I find useful for thinking. There's a fern near the kitchen window that I have kept alive for 11 years, which is longer than most things in my life have stayed in one place. There is a stack of unread novels on my nightstand. There is a scar along my left knee from a training accident in 2009 that tells me when rain is coming more reliably than any forecast. I take ibuprofen for it in the mornings and do not mention it to anyone. I drive a 7-year-old truck with a cracked dashboard and a radio that only works in one direction. Volume up, but not down. I own 4 civilian outfits and rotate them without much thought. My neighbors know me as the woman who keeps quiet hours and returns borrowed tools promptly. They do not know what I do for a living. I let them believe it. I am a colonel in the United States Army. My specialty is intelligence, the kind that does not appear in press releases, that does not come with ceremonies open to the public, that does not generate the sort of photograph a family can frame and hang in a hallway. The decisions I have made in my career were made in rooms with no windows, in languages I am not supposed to admit I speak, about people and situations that do not officially exist. My record is classified above the level most general officers will reach in their entire careers. My call sign is Cold Harbor. I earned it in a debrief in 2011 that I cannot describe in detail, in a location I cannot name, following an operation that lasted 6 days longer than planned and ended with a result that was called, in a 4-page summary written by people who were not there, satisfactory. I have not shared that word with anyone outside of the people who were in that room. When I returned to civilian clothes and drove to Georgia for my cousin Sandra's baby shower 3 weeks later, I sat at a kitchen table and ate potato salad and listened to my Aunt Patricia describe Sandra's husband's promotion at his law firm in considerable detail. Nobody asked where I had been. Nobody asked what I had been doing. I did not offer to explain. I let them believe it. I am telling you this now because in a few hours, at a wedding in South Carolina, a room full of people would hear that call sign spoken aloud for the first time. And I want you to understand something before we get there. They would not hear it from me. Patricia Hargrove is my mother's older sister, which means she arrived in my life before I had any say in the matter and has remained there with a consistency I have come to regard the way I regard my knee. A chronic condition, managed but not cured. She is 67 years old. She has lived in the same house in Savannah, Georgia, for 41 years. She has 3 children, Sandra, who is a tax attorney, Brian, who builds custom homes, and Kevin, who plays guitar in a band that has been about to break through for the last 14 years. She has attended every school play, every graduation, every wedding, every christening, and every milestone event in her children's lives, with the punctuality and documentation of a court reporter. She has built, over 6 decades, an edifice of family identity, of what this family is, what it produces, what it means, and she maintains it the way some people maintain a garden, by deciding, firmly and continuously, what belongs and what should be cut back. I have always been the thing she wasn't sure where to put, not out of cruelty. I want to be precise about that. Patricia Hargrove is not a cruel woman. She is a woman who has organized the world into categories she understands, and I stopped fitting her categories in approximately 2002. When I left for officer candidate school, instead of the law school, she had been quietly assuming I would attend. She did not yell. She did not cut me off. She simply reorganized the story she told about me. I became, in her telling, the one who had gone into the government, the one who worked in offices somewhere and traveled a great deal, the one who hadn't quite settled down yet, the one we were all so proud of. She would say, even though I could hear in the pause before that sentence exactly how much certainty she was manufacturing. The first time I registered it clearly, I was 31. I had come home for Thanksgiving 3 weeks after returning from my second deployment. I was still adjusting to sleeping in a room without a threat assessment running in the background of my mind. I sat at Patricia's dining room table and watched her describe Sandra's new client portfolio to the assembled family for 45 minutes. And when Brian asked what I had been up to, Patricia answered before I could. Oh, Maggie's been traveling. You know how government work is. Lots of meetings. I looked at my mashed potatoes. Meetings. I said nothing. My mother, sitting across from me, caught my eye and held it for a moment. She reached for the gravy and did not speak either, but her hand found mine briefly under the table before she let go. That was the first time. The second time was clearer. I was 37. Sandra had made partner at her firm, and Patricia threw a dinner party in her honor that I attended wearing civilian clothes because my dress uniform was still at the dry cleaner in Fayetteville. 15 people. Good wine. Patricia stood at the head of the table and raised a glass to Sandra, to her daughter's discipline, her sacrifice, the years she had spent building something real, something that would last. She used the word legacy 3 times. She used the word contribution twice. She did not raise a glass to me. I was not jealous of Sandra. I want to be clear about that too. Sandra had worked hard and earned everything she had. What I noticed was not the presence of her recognition, but the architecture of its absence in mine. The way Patricia moved the room's attention as naturally as furniture, placing it where she wanted it to go and leaving certain corners in the dark by design. Afterward, in the kitchen, while I was helping clear the dessert plates, Patricia put her hand on my arm with the gentle pressure of someone delivering soft news. "You know we're all so proud of you too. Honey," she said, "I just think it's hard for people to understand what you do. It's so abstract." Abstract. I set the plate in the sink. I ran the water. I said, "That's okay, Patricia." And I meant it. Not because it didn't cost me anything. Because I understood something by then that she did not. I had spent my career making decisions under conditions where the wrong answer got people killed. A dinner party in Savannah did not require my full capacity. I let her believe it. My mother was at that dinner too. She sat 3 seats down from Patricia and she ate her salmon and she did not correct anything Patricia said. After dessert, in the kitchen, she helped me with the plates, and she said exactly one thing. "I read about the operation in Kandahar. It didn't name you, but I knew." I looked at her. "How?" She shrugged. "Because it sounded like something you would do." She handed me a dry dish towel and went back to the table. She never brought it up again. She didn't need to. I counted once, without meaning to. 14 Christmases since I earned my first commendation. 11 family dinners where someone asked what I did, and Patricia answered for me. 7 deployments nobody in that tent knew happened. 4 times I called home from locations I couldn't name, and heard a voicemail because no one picked up. I am not telling you these numbers to build a case. I am telling you because they are simply what the years looked like, tallied honestly. There was one more thing I knew but had not included in my count. 2 years before Claire's wedding, I had updated my emergency contact records at Fort Bragg. I listed Sandra, a decision I made quickly and did not reverse. A few months later, the base's family liaison office sent her a form letter, an invitation to a recognition ceremony for personnel in my unit. A small event, closed to the public. Her name was on the mailing list because mine had put it there. She never mentioned it to Patricia. She never mentioned it to me either. I found out when I pulled my own administrative file 3 years later. Sandra had not actively concealed it. She had simply not passed it along, in the quiet arithmetic of a family that had decided, over many years, what kind of information deserved to be shared. That counted as a choice. She had held the knowledge the way people hold things they are not sure what to do with, and she had said nothing. That is the architecture of silence, not the person who builds the wall, the person who sees the door and decides not to open it. The third time, the moment that made all of those numbers mean something different, arrived at my niece Claire's wedding. Claire is Brian's daughter. She is 26, and she married a good man named Thomas at a venue outside of Charleston in June, and the wedding was exactly the kind of event Claire deserved. White canopy tents on a lawn above a river, string lights, a quartet that played Etta James between courses, 200 guests who genuinely loved her. I was seated at a family table near the middle of the tent. Across from me, my cousin Sandra, polished and certain in a way I have always privately admired, and her husband, Richard, who sells commercial real estate and has never once asked me a follow-up question. To my right, Brian's wife, Linda. To my left, an empty chair that Patricia had claimed and then vacated repeatedly to circulate through the room. I wore a dark green dress I had bought 2 months earlier for this occasion. My knee ached from the drive up from Fayetteville. I ate the appetizers and watched the river catch the last of the afternoon light, and thought about nothing in particular. I noticed the gray-haired man at the corner table when I arrived. I registered him the way I register all rooms. Door positions, sight lines, the location of people who sit facing the entrance instead of away from it. He was watching the proceedings with the careful neutrality of someone who had learned long ago that watching was more useful than participating. I did not recognize him immediately, not from 40 feet away, not in civilian clothes, not without the context of the environments where I had encountered him before. But I noted him, the way you note certain things. Not because you know what they mean yet, but because you know they mean something. Patricia began her toast at approximately 7:15. I had not slept well the night before. This was not unusual. There is a particular kind of insomnia that comes with certain kinds of work. Not anxiety, not fear, just the operational mind that does not fully understand how to be idle. I lay in my hotel room and listened to the rain on the window, a slow, gray June rain that moved through Charleston and left the morning clean and heavy. And I thought about my mother. She had been gone 2 years. Lung cancer, quick and unfair. The way illness tends to be when it takes someone whose particular quality of attention you relied upon without fully knowing it. She had died in April, and I had been in a hospital room in Bethesda when it happened. Not her hospital room, but another one entirely, visiting a source who had been injured in a way I cannot describe to you. And I had gotten the call 6 hours after the fact because my phone had been off in a building where phones are required to be off. I did not make it in time. This is the thing about the work I do. It costs in specific ways that are difficult to explain to people who haven't done it, and impossible to justify to people who never asked about it. I did not make it to my mother's bedside because I was doing the kind of thing that does not appear in newspapers and does not receive ceremonies and cannot be offered as an explanation at a family dinner. I had told no one this, not Brian, not Sandra, not Patricia. Especially not Patricia, who had organized the funeral with her characteristic efficiency and had managed, somehow, to make my mother's death feel like one more event in the family calendar. Managed beautifully. Run on schedule. I sat in the hotel room and listened to the rain stop. Then I put on the green dress and drove to the venue. At the table, as the evening settled and the meal moved into its later courses, I became aware that Patricia was preparing herself for something. I recognized the signs, the small straightening of posture, the repositioning of the champagne flute, the scanning of the room to assess her audience's attention. She had something to say. She had been composing it, I suspected, for weeks. She stood, the clinking of silverware against glass. The quartet paused. "If I could have everyone's attention for just a few minutes," Patricia said. "I want to say something about family." I reached for my water glass. To my left, the gray-haired man at the corner table looked up. That was when I recognized him. Not all at once. More like a photograph developing in stages. The jaw first, then the posture, then the hands, and finally the eyes, the specific quality of attention that I had been in the presence of exactly twice before, in rooms where nothing said was ever repeated. My hand did not move, my face did not change, but something inside me went extremely still. He was looking at Patricia, then he looked at me. I gave him nothing. 14 years of training had made my face, in moments of operational significance, completely unremarkable. But I saw him arrive at the same recognition I had just reached. His eyes did not widen. He simply held the information, the way certain people do. He picked up his fork. He set it down again. He was deciding something. I returned my attention to Patricia. "Claire and Thomas," she was saying, "represent everything I believe a family should build toward. Stability. Purpose. A life that other people can see and understand and feel proud of. A life that other people can see and understand." I looked at my water glass. "I look around this room," Patricia continued, "and I see what this family has given the world. Sandra, who has built a career that speaks for itself. Brian, who builds homes with his own 2 hands. Kevin, Brief pause. Fond smile. Kevin is still building. Laughter. And I think, what a family. What a real contribution to the world. She paused for effect. She let her eyes move around the table. They moved past me. I always hoped, she said. And her voice carried the warmth of someone delivering a sentiment they have held for a very long time. That our family would give the world something it could point to. Something real. Doctors, lawyers, builders, people who make things you can see and touch and measure. She smiled at Claire. Not government employees. The last two words arrived in a different register. Lower, gently amused. The crowd-pleasing tone of a woman who knows how to land a soft joke. A few people at nearby tables laughed politely, and the gray-haired man at the corner table placed his silverware across his plate, very precisely, and stood up. I want to tell you something about the months before that evening. After my mother's funeral, I went back to work within 4 days. This is what I do, not because I am cold, but because the alternative is staying in a house that smells like someone who no longer lives in it. And the work was the one context in my life where the rules were clear. But I had driven to my mother's house in the weeks after, and I had sat in her bedroom. And I had gone through the things she had left with the careful attention of someone cataloging a room that will not be available for re-entry, in the second drawer of her nightstand. Under a telephone book that was 4 years out of date and a pair of reading glasses with one bent arm, I found an envelope. It was addressed in her handwriting, not to me, to Claire. For Claire, to be opened at the wedding. If Maggie attends. I held it for a while. I held it up to the window light once. Through the paper I could see the outlines of something layered inside. Newsprint. Clipped and folded. Many pieces of it. More than one page. More than 1 year. I put it back down. Then I put it in my jacket pocket and drove back to Fayetteville. I ran 4 miles that evening, which I have not done consistently since my knee, and I sat on the porch afterward until it was dark. I did not open it. It was not mine to open, but I carried it for 2 months in the interior pocket of the garment bag with my dress, and then I drove to Charleston. And I placed it in my evening bag before I walked into the tent. I had also made one call, 6 weeks earlier. Not to Patricia. Not to Sandra. To a man I had served with at a level that required both of us to maintain contact information, we were careful not to use frivolously. He owed me nothing. I owed him nothing. What we shared was the particular currency of people who had been in difficult rooms together and had both survived. I told him where I would be and when. I told him nothing else. "I'll see what I can do," he said. That was all. No explanation. No elaboration. I did not know. As I sat at the family table and watched Patricia raise her champagne flute and describe a legacy that did not include me, whether he had made any arrangement at all, but the gray-haired man at the corner table had stood up. And that was enough. The tent went quiet the way tents go quiet when something happens that nobody has a script for. Not silence exactly. There was still the soft complaint of a chair being shifted. Still the ripple of whispered questions traveling from one table to the next. Still the sound of river wind pressing against the white canvas above us. But the human noise, the clinking, the laughing, the performance of celebration, drained out of the room in about 4 seconds, which is faster than most people believe silence can arrive. Patricia was still holding her champagne flute. The gray-haired man stood at his full height, which was considerable, and he looked at no one in the room except me. His expression was not dramatic. It was not warm. It was the expression of someone who has arrived to perform a specific function and intends to perform it correctly. He said, "Colonel Cross, forgive me." 4 words. Patricia's flute descended. He moved toward our table. Not quickly. He was a man who had learned long ago that pace is authority. People parted ahead of him without fully understanding why. 200 guests watched him cross the room, and not one of them spoke. He stopped at the edge of our table. He did not look at Patricia. He did not look at Sandra or Richard or Brian or Linda. He looked at me. "I apologize for the interruption," he said. To the room, but to me. I'll be brief. My Aunt Patricia found her voice. I'm sorry, I don't. He turned his head, very slightly, in her direction. That was all. She stopped. He looked back at me. Ma'am, he said, and I heard Sandra inhale sharply at the formality of it. I've been trying to find the right moment to say something to you in person for approximately 3 years. I don't believe this is the right moment, but I've come to accept that there may not be a right one. He paused. The tent was still. What I can tell you publicly, and what I want your family to hear, is this. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The room was so completely quiet that every table heard him with the same clarity as the table where he stood. In the spring of 2019, there were 3 situations developing simultaneously in 3 separate parts of the world that each, independently, had the potential for consequences that would have changed the geopolitical reality you and I both currently live in. I am not going to describe those situations. I am not in a position to do so. He paused. What I will tell you is that in each of those situations, a set of decisions was made by a single analyst, alone, without committee, without the benefit of confirmation from lateral sources, because there was no time. Those decisions required a level of pattern recognition that I have not encountered in 31 years of this work. They also required something that pattern recognition alone cannot produce. He stopped. They required the willingness to be right when being wrong would have been considerably safer for the person making the call. No one moved. My knee hurt. I was aware of it in the way I am sometimes aware of it. A dull, grounding ache that reminds me my body has a history. I did not shift in my seat. 3 heads of state, he said, are alive tonight because of decisions made by this woman. He did not gesture. He did not need to. People whose names you read in the newspaper. People whose continued presence affects the daily lives of civilians in countries you have visited. They are alive. Their governments are stable. Their people are not at war. He let that sit. I cannot tell you which heads of state. I cannot tell you which countries. I cannot tell you the year or the specific nature of the situations. What I can tell you, as a matter of unclassified record, is that Colonel Margaret Cross received a commendation that I am not authorized to name, for work that I am not authorized to describe, and that she has never, the faintest emphasis, mentioned it, to anyone, in this room or anywhere else. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He removed a business card. He placed it face down on the table in front of me. Cold Harbor, he said quietly, not to the room, to me. The first time my call sign had been spoken aloud outside of a secure environment in years. It was an honor. He straightened. He looked at Patricia Hargrove for exactly 3 seconds. His expression did not change. Then he turned and walked back to his corner table, sat down, and picked up his fork. The silence held for another 5 full seconds. I counted them. Outside the tent, the river kept moving. I remember thinking, it doesn't need anyone to confirm it. Then Claire, at the head table, made a sound that might have been a breath, or might have been the beginning of a word, and the room began to exhale. I did not look at Patricia. I looked at Claire, who was looking at me with the expression of someone encountering a piece of their family they had believed they understood, and now realized they had never seen clearly. I reached for my water glass. I took a drink. I set it down. Patricia sat down. She sat down the way you sit down when the ground has shifted under you, and sitting is the only thing that makes sense. She placed both hands in her lap and looked at the table in front of her, and for the first time in the 38 years I had known her, she looked genuinely small. Brian said my name. Just that. Maggie. As if he were checking whether I was still the same person. I looked at him. I know, I said. It's all right, he shook his head. It's not, Brian, quietly. It's all right. Sandra was looking at me with the focused expression of someone running a rapid recalculation. Sandra had spent her entire career building cases. And I recognized in her eyes the moment when a lawyer understands that all of the evidence has been there for a very long time, and she simply did not know to look for it. "How long?" she asked. "Since I was 27, I said. She closed her eyes briefly. "We never asked." "No, I thought—" She stopped, started again. Patricia always made it sound like— I know what Patricia made it sound like. Sandra looked down at her plate. She was not a woman who apologized easily. I respected that about her, actually. But I could see her working through something, turning it over, measuring it against the structure of everything she thought she had understood. I did not help her. Some reckonings need to be done in private. Across the table, Patricia had not moved. Her champagne flute was still on the table. She had not refilled it. The quartet started again, tentatively, somewhere behind the head table. Claire and Thomas were speaking quietly to each other. The room was finding its way back to celebration. The way rooms do. Not because people forget, but because a wedding is an occasion that has its own momentum, and 200 guests are a force for continuity. I reached into my evening bag. I removed the envelope. I stood up. Patricia looked up then. I walked around the table to where she was sitting. And I placed the envelope in front of her without comment. Her name was not on it. She could see that. She could see Claire's name in my mother's handwriting, and she could see the instruction below it. Her hands remained in her lap. "It's from Mom," I said. She left it in her nightstand. "I've been carrying it for 2 months." Patricia looked at the envelope for a long time. Then she said, in a voice that had lost every performance quality it usually carried, "I didn't know. Margaret," I looked at her. "About what you did. About any of it. I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. "You should have told me." I was quiet for a moment. Outside the tent, the river moved past in the dark. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a car's headlights swept through the Spanish moss and disappeared. "Patricia," I said, "I tried to tell you who I was for 20 years. You weren't listening for that version." She looked up at me. Her eyes were wet, though she was not, and had never been. A woman who cried in public. She was fighting her eyes. I watched her fight them. I did not help her. "Take the envelope to Claire," I said. "That's who it belongs to." I did not wait for her response. I walked to the head table, and I put my hand briefly on Claire's shoulder. She looked up, startled, and I said, "Your grandmother left you something. Your great-aunt has it. Ask her for it when the evening is quieter." Claire nodded. Her eyes were very bright. "Aunt Maggie," she said, "I'm so sorry I didn't." "Don't," I said gently. "Tonight is yours. It should stay that way." I kissed her on the cheek. She smelled like tuberose, and something warm and familiar that I realized after a moment was the same perfume my mother had worn. I straightened. I walked back to my seat and finished the piece of wedding cake that had been placed there during the commotion. It was lemon, with a raspberry layer, and it was genuinely excellent. The gray-haired man at the corner table, when I glanced in his direction, was eating his own piece of cake. He did not look up. When the evening wound down, when the guests began to drift toward the parking area in the warm June dark, I found my coat, said my goodbyes, and walked out through the tent's rear opening toward where I had parked the truck. The river was close here. I could smell it. The green, mineral smell of moving fresh water in summer. The same smell that had been in the air all evening, patient and indifferent, going about its own business while 200 people marked the beginning of a life inside a white tent above its banks. I stood at the edge of the lawn for a moment. There were no grand conclusions available to me in that moment. That is the thing about a life like mine. The meaning doesn't arrive in ceremony. It was already there. In the work, in the decisions made alone in rooms with no windows. In the specific and unrepeatable texture of 14 years spent doing something that mattered without anyone's permission or acknowledgement. A cricket started near the water, then another. Then the sound became continuous. I got in the truck. I drove south on 17 through the coastal dark. The radio came on when I started the engine, too loud as always, and I reached for the dial and turned it. The wrong direction, the only direction it went. And the volume climbed one more notch before I gave up and turned it off entirely. I had tried to fix it twice. Eventually, I accepted that some things only go one direction. The volume, the years, the way certain people hear you, or don't. The highway stretched ahead in the headlights, live oaks on both sides, draped in moss, the same trees that had been there for 100 years, indifferent to everything that happened beneath them, somewhere north of Walterboro. I reached into my evening bag and found the ibuprofen and took 2 of them dry. The knee always knew when rain was coming. 6 months after the wedding. Brian mentioned that Patricia had not been asked to give the family toast at Kevin's engagement party. Linda had arranged the evening, quietly, without explanation. Patricia attended. She sat at a side table and did not raise her glass once. Brian did not elaborate. I did not ask him to. Some things settle without anyone having to announce the settlement. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from Claire. Patricia had given her the envelope that same night. She had opened it the following morning with Thomas beside her. My mother had been keeping records for 23 years, newspaper articles mentioning regions I had been deployed to, press releases citing anonymous military personnel, one photograph from a Pentagon ceremony where I appeared in the back row, face slightly turned from the camera. She had found it anyway. She had written one sentence on a note card tucked inside. "Claire, your Aunt Maggie has been giving the world something real for your entire life. I thought you should know. I read that in my kitchen in Fayetteville. Morning light coming through the window above the fern. And I sat down on the floor and stayed there for a while. Not because it broke me. Because some things need to land properly. And landing properly sometimes requires sitting down. My mother saw me for 23 years without being told what to look for. She chose to. Alone. Without asking me to know she was doing it. This is what the name means to me now. Cold Harbor is a real place. A battlefield in Virginia where, in June of 1864, a poorly conceived assault resulted in catastrophic losses in less than an hour. It is remembered not as a victory, but as a lesson. About the cost of assumptions. About the difference between confidence and information. When I was given that call sign, I thought it was about the cold, the stillness, the patience, the absence of heat that good intelligence work requires. But it is also about the aftermath. Cold Harbor is remembered not by the people who ordered the assault, but by those who survived it, and by the ones who changed how they thought about the next engagement. The truth has a patience that contempt does not. I think about that sound sometimes. Silverware on porcelain. Placed deliberately in a tent above a river in South Carolina. A tool set down. A decision made. I have heard larger sounds in my life. But that small sound is the one I return to. Because it was not the sound of a weapon. It was the sound of the truth arriving on schedule. I am 45 years old. My knee predicts rain. My fern is 11 years old. I have 4 civilian outfits and a truck with a radio that only goes one direction. Not one day of it wasted. If this story touched something in you, if you have carried something real in a room that was looking for something smaller, I hope you'll share it. For the person in your life who is quietly doing the same thing and needs to know they are not alone, the silence they mistook for surrender was never surrender. It was patience. And patience, in the end, is the one thing that time always confirms.